want to talk a little bit about learning. Learning is hard. Learning to program in particular can be really intimidating because the more that you learn, the more you uncover this interconnected menagerie of like technologies that are woven together. It's really complicated. If you've never built a web application before, it can be really hard, like especially if you're refreshing skills. It can be kind of overwhelming to keep track of what does what, why, when, how things happen. Especially when there are tons of different ways that you can do things instead. So essentially, how do you get all of this information to stick, especially when you have so much that's unfamiliar to you? You have to make it familiar. And you do that, in my opinion, with analogies. I like this quote from Edutopia. They have a really good article that talks about sort of like use of analogies when learning. Basically it says the science of memory tells us that a novel stimulus is more easily remembered if it has an existing framework or an assimilative context to which it can connect. The more established the framework, the more readily accessible that stimulus will consequently be. So the more you're familiar with something, the easier it's going to be for you to learn about it. And so this touches on two main qualities that I tend to aim for when I'm thinking about use of analogies to either learn something myself or to help somebody else learn. So one, it has to be familiar. Like it has to be something that you're aware of, that you can connect to the thing that you're learning about. Like essentially, if someone came to me and was like, you know, I have an analogy about, you know, that's going to help you learn how to program with Elixir, and it uses like shark hunting. Like, I'm not gonna understand that. I don't know about sharks. I don't know how to hunt sharks. It's just not gonna work for me. But if somebody was just like, oh, I'm gonna explain Elixir with like Pokemon, like I can do that. I know tons about Pokemon. That's something that connects with me. And it also has to be interesting. That's kind of like a personal requirement for me. That I made for myself. I love to laugh. I remember things a lot more easily when they're funny or just like wildly absurd. So the second requirement is something that I made for myself. I love to laugh. I love things that are absurd and ridiculous. And so I try to make analogies that are absurd because it just sticks better for me. If it's something that I remember that I was just like, that was wild. I don't know how I thought that up, but I'm not going to forget it because like there's nothing else in my memory that's kind of like it. And that's why it's important that I also think that you make analogies yourself. It's not really a hard and fast rule. Like plenty of people create analogies and use them to help teach other people in ways that are approachable enough that like those folks are going to remember. But going through the effort of trying to think of an analogy on your own is something that kind of tips the scales for me in terms of memory. And like it also doesn't have to be perfect. Like even if a connection doesn't make perfect sense, if it makes enough sense for you to understand the purpose behind creating that analogy and making that connection and filling in the gaps, that's really good enough. So I'm going to launch into an example. Recently, I've been using the Remix framework. When I started, I had pretty much zero experience using React-based frameworks. I had never built a site with components before. Like last site that I built was like basically like raw HTML and CSS on like Bootstrap. Like that's where I was coming from. So the idea of building a website in this capacity was just very new for me. And so like having very little experience implementing things, also like databases and object storage, you know, it felt a bit like there was a wall of information in front of me that I was like struggling to climb over because it's like, well, I have to learn this one thing, but then there are these other things that I have to learn in order to understand context about this other thing, and then to learn those other things, I have to learn this other part. It's a lot. So at the same time, in my personal life, I have been wrestling with the age-old dilemma of just like trying to get my kids to eat food. Toddlers are picky. They really love chicken nuggets one day, and then like the next day, it's their mortal enemy. Like, do not show them a chicken nugget, no matter what. And then like the babies, I have a baby that's like 1.5 years old. She just loves throwing things. And then when she throws things and the food's not in front of her, she gets angry. It makes absolutely no sense. So with all of the challenges that I'm running into, like just trying to feed children and also trying to build on this framework, I thought like maybe I can make an analogy that like connects the two of them together and will make it easier for me, you know, maybe to learn this thing. So I've got an example. So building a web application is just like making breakfast for your kids. Just imagine like it's 6 a.m., you've put Sesame Street on you know, the television. Elmo is really annoying, but Elmo makes the children happy, and so Elmo can just be there as long as he wants. You've just made bacon, eggs, and pancakes for your kids for breakfast. This is your table. Your table is your React website. Your place settings are your routes. And you are a very stressed out API. You fulfill the request, sometime grudgingly, because maybe they're asking for something and you're like, I really don't want to make a souffle for breakfast. But you know, if you want to make a souffle, if you want a souffle and it makes you eat, I will make a souffle at like 6 o'clock in the morning. And they're cute little sectioned plates. Those are their requests. So when she sets her plate down at the About place setting, you fulfill her request by adding food in each of the sections. And each of the sections are the components that she should be served on her plate based on the route that she's on. So we've got our toddler on the About page. We've got the baby. She's on the home page. She's got eggs. She's happy with eggs. Let her stay on the home page as long as she wants. And so what about all the content then? Something has to be storing it. So your fridge is your server. Like it houses your site's content, it houses the code, it houses like your, you know, let's pretend it also houses your database and your object stores. There are, you know, different services that do those things, but we're trying to keep a simple analogy. So we're just gonna say the server does it all, you know, it's magical. You need some authentication, just put a fridge lock on it. I didn't even know they made locks specific for fridges, but thank God they do because it works for this analogy. So then, let's imagine that things get more complicated. So you've got more people. Suddenly your family is like, you're good at cooking. Why don't you just do Thanksgiving? You know, just do Thanksgiving. That's an easy request. So you've got a bigger table, which means you have more routes. You have more requests that are going to be served to more people that are going to those routes. So people are asking for more content. You have to make different dice. You're making turkey, you're making stuffing, you've got gravy, you struggle to keep up. Your uncle starts complaining about loading times, as they do. So you've got feature requests coming in. You also have bug reports coming in from people. And oh God, now there's an incident occurring. Things are just falling apart. So you need more hands. You hire new developers. You get your auntie to come in to help you make the gravy. You've burned the gravy, the incident's over, like make new gravy please so I don't have to do, like take some of the tasks off of my plate. You've got your mom running interception at the door to keep people out of your kitchen because people are asking you for these like random things that you just really don't need in your web application. So she's essentially fulfilling the role of like customer support. And now you're sort of like, you know, you have this analogy that kind of works. It works enough. Like, it's not perfect, but it helped me. Like, after thinking this up and like realizing like this is the most ridiculous thing that I've ever heard, like feeding children, Thanksgiving equaling, you know, this process of me creating this website. But like, I'm not forgetting it. It sticks in my head. And so I'm hoping that this example can kind of like, you know, inspire you to think about like, are there other ways in which like I can connect things in my life as analogies into like building so I can learn better? Maybe I can share those with other people. Maybe it will make them laugh. Maybe they won't forget either because it's just so unique and so outlandish that it just works. And yeah, that's kind of it. I hope you enjoyed it.